"What holdings?" she had said, and he had not replied. She rolled onto her side. She shut her eyes. She tried to place the question in a frame that made sense, some routine frame, something minor, something that explained why a man like Marcus would have holdings to reference at all. She couldn't locate one. She lay still in the expensive darkness and tried to recall if she had ever once asked Marcus what his father had left behind. The answer settled into her chest like something cold. She had not. Marcus was on the site by 5:40. Same truck, same thermos, same worn boots on the same hard ground. The sky still held the deep blue of early morning when he pulled in, and the motion sensor above the trailer entrance switched on automatically as he stepped out. He stood there a moment, both hands around the thermos, and studied the skeleton of what was rising. Steel and concrete, the frame of a thing not yet finished. He gave a single nod and went to work. By 7, 3 of his crew were present and the 4th was behind schedule. Marcus didn't mention it. He was already kneeling near the southwest corner of the foundation, flashlight in one hand, inspecting a section of rebar placement that had been nagging him since the previous week's pour. The interval was off. Not critically, but enough. He marked it with a stripe of orange chalk and left a note fastened to the foreman's board before the foreman had even arrived. That was the thing about Marcus. He never waited for someone else to locate the problem. The calls began that same afternoon. He made them from his truck during the lunch hour. Engine off, windows down, thermos on the dash. 2 calls, both to men who had known his father for decades. Men who had sat at that walnut desk in the family study and negotiated over coffee and never once needed anything explained a second time. The first was Raymond Acaffer, 73 years old, private equity, 4 commercial developments currently under management across the metro region. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus Reed," Raymond said, his voice wide and warm like a room you had been in before. "I figured I'd be hearing from you. I should have reached out sooner," Marcus said. "You're reaching out now," Raymond said simply. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the trust has been still long enough," Marcus said. "I'm thinking it may be time to make clear who people are actually dealing with." A pause. Then Raymond made a low sound that wasn't quite a laugh but carried the same ease. "Come by on Friday," he said. "Bring Simone." The second call was to Gerald Hinz, 65, property law, a man who had helped draft 4 of the original trust documents alongside Marcus's father. Gerald said little on the phone. He listened, put forward 2 questions, and then said, "I'll make sure the relevant people understand you're in motion." Marcus thanked him and went back to work. Word moved the way it always moves in private circles. Not loudly, not quickly, but with the particular gravity that comes from the right voices saying the right things to the right ears. By the close of the week, it was understood in certain rooms that the Reed Trust was repositioning. No statements, no coverage, just the quiet reorientation of attention that occurs when serious capital decides to stop holding still. The Urban Development Forum was held on a Wednesday in November. A large room, high ceilings, round tables, a raised platform at the far end with a lectern, and a panel arrangement already in place. The kind of gathering where networking began before anyone found their seat. Business cards passed like currency. Conversations opened in doorways and along walls and on the path to the refreshment table. Marcus wore a dark jacket over a clean collared shirt, no tie. He carried a legal pad and a pen and nothing else. He had barely stepped past the registration desk when the first greeting came. A city infrastructure commissioner named Harold Grant who shook Marcus's hand like they had seen each other recently, though it had been nearly 3 years. Then a woman named Patricia Lim from the Regional Planning Board who smiled and said, "Tell me the trust is finally going to do something with the Callaway end." Then Raymond, appearing from the left side of the room, who introduced Marcus to 2 men whose names Marcus already recognized from his father's correspondence. None of these people had ever appeared in Carla's world. None of them had ever come up at the dinner table. Marcus moved through the room the way he moved through a job site. Unhurried, deliberate, attentive. 40 minutes in, a woman with the forum's organizing committee approached him near the refreshment station and asked whether he would be willing to take a seat on the afternoon panel on private land stewardship in urban development. We had a last-minute withdrawal, she said. And honestly, with the trust's holdings, you're exactly who that discussion needs. Marcus looked at her. What time? 3 o'clock, she said. I'll be there, he said. It was just before the midday recess when a developer named Stephen Carr pulled him aside. Stephen was in his early 60s, steady, the kind of man who chose his words with care. They found a quiet section near the rear wall, away from the main current of the room. Something you need to be aware of, Stephen said, keeping his voice low. Dominic Hale. He's been circulating a development proposal for roughly 2 years now. Different backers, same pitch, large mixed-use build. The whole concept is structured around acquiring the industrial land in the Callaway corridor. Marcus kept his expression level. Reed Trust land. Your land, Stephen said. He's been telling people he has access to the owner, that it's essentially settled, just a question of when. Stephen's jaw held a slight tension. I've heard it from 4 different sources, Marcus. He has never spoken to you or Simon once. Marcus nodded slowly. I appreciate you letting me know. Stephen studied him for a moment. Thought you deserved to know whose name was being used. They shook hands. Stephen rejoined the room. Marcus stood at the edge of the gathering for a moment. Around him, the space hummed with conversation and the light ring of glassware and the performance of ambition. He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out his phone. He stepped through the side exit into the quiet corridor. Simone answered immediately. It's time to make an introduction, Marcus said. Marcus called Carla's attorney at 8:20 the following morning. He was sitting in his truck outside the job site, engine off, thermos on the dash. The crew was already active behind the chain-link fence, and he could hear the low start of equipment running, but he stayed where he was and placed the call. The attorney's name was Lawrence Pratt. He was careful and polished in the way that high-end family law attorneys tend to be. Every word accounted for before delivery. He came on the line after 40 seconds. Mr. Reed, he said, I wasn't anticipating a direct call. I understand, Marcus said. I'm calling to schedule the final settlement meeting. I'd like to hold it at the house this Saturday if Carla is available. A pause. Pages moved somewhere on the other end. I'll check with my client and get back to you, Pratt said. Is there anything specific you'd like to address before I'd like 15 minutes alone with her before attorneys enter the room, Marcus said. Another pause. Longer. I'll pass that request along. Thank you, Marcus said. He hung up and went to work. Carla agreed. Marcus wasn't surprised. She would want to see the house one final time. She would want to see him to confirm perhaps that she had made the correct call. People who need to believe they made the correct call usually want one more look at what they're leaving behind. Saturday morning came in gray and still. Marcus pulled into the driveway at 9:50. He sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at the front door, the young maple in the yard that had grown nearly a foot since they had planted it together, the garage where his father's old drafting table was still stored at the back behind the lawn equipment. He picked up his thermos. He got out of the truck. Carla was standing in the living room when he came through the door. Her arms were folded, not defensively, more like she was holding something in place inside herself. She looked composed. She had always looked composed. That had never been the issue. Marcus, she said. Carla, he said. He didn't sit. She didn't either. He set his thermos on the side table near the entrance, the same spot he had set it every morning for 9 years, and he looked at her directly. I'm going to tell you some things, he said. Not to cause you pain, because you made a significant decision and you deserve to understand what you actually decided. Something shifted in her expression. Not fear exactly. Attention. He told her about the trust, its structure, its origin, how his father had built it across 3 decades. He told her about the commercial corridor, including the building where her hospital network's administrative offices had been paying monthly rent to a property management company that reported directly to the Reed Trust. He told her about the industrial warehouses, the development fund, the controlling position. He told her the valuation, the actual figure stated plainly without performance. He watched her face as he spoke. At first she didn't accept it. Her expression was smooth and skeptical, the look of someone waiting to find the catch. Then the skepticism began to give. He could see the numbers beginning to move behind her eyes, the recalculations, the comparisons, 12 years of mornings in that house. the pieces assembling themselves into a shape she had never seen before. Then the calculations stilled, and what took their place was something quieter and harder to look at. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Her voice had changed. It was smaller. "My father told me the right person wouldn't need to know," Marcus said. "I believed that. Maybe I was wrong too. But Carla, I showed you who I was every single day. I showed up. I fixed what needed fixing. I sat at that table and listened to you describe what you deserved and what you wished your life looked like." He paused. "I never concealed who I was. You simply decided that wasn't sufficient. Before you ever considered asking what else there might be." She uncrossed her arms. Her hands fell to her sides. "Is there any possibility?" she began. He shook his head. "One small, clean motion." "The papers are already finalized," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze steadily. "I hope things become easier for you," he said. He meant it not with warmth but with honesty. There was no anger remaining in him. He had set it down somewhere between his mother's kitchen table and a Wednesday morning forum, and had no reason to retrieve it. He turned and opened the front door and called back toward the driveway where Simone was waiting in her car. He left Carla everything she had asked for, every piece of furniture she had requested, every account she had listed, every item on the settlement she had submitted through Lawrence Pratt. He took his father's walnut desk, the drafting table from the garage, a small framed photograph from the study wall, and his tools. That was all. He carried the last box out himself. He loaded it into the bed of the pickup. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. He had one more meeting today. Dominic's building was 14 stories of glass and pale stone in the center of the downtown development corridor. The kind of structure designed to make an impression before you reach the entrance. Marcus had driven past it dozens of times without stopping. He pulled into the parking structure. Simone was already there, standing beside her car in a charcoal blazer, a leather portfolio under one arm, her expression the same as always. Composed, focused, ready. "His partner's name is Raymond Finch," she said as Marcus stepped out of the truck. "He's been with Dominic's firm for 7 years. Manages investor relations." "Good," Marcus said. They walked to the elevator together. The conference room occupied the 11th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table of pale ash wood, a wall-mounted display at the far end already illuminated with the opening frame of a pitch deck. Bold lettering, aerial imagery, projected figures arranged in clean columns. Dominic Hale was on his feet when they entered. He was precisely what Marcus had expected. Well-built, sharply dressed, the kind of man whose handshake reached you before his words did, firm and well-rehearsed. "Marcus," he said, smiling broadly. He used the name as though they were long-time acquaintances. "Good to finally be in the same room. I've heard nothing but strong things." "Mr. Hale," Marcus said. He took the hand. He did not smile. Raymond Finch sat at the far end of the table, younger, watchful, the kind of man who read a room before he committed to anything. He gave Marcus a brief nod and glanced at Simone. "This is Simone Croft," Marcus said. "She manages our legal and financial affairs." Dominic gestured toward the chairs along one side of the table. "Please," he said. "Can we offer you anything? Coffee, water?" "No," Marcus said. "Thank you." They sat. Dominic settled into his chair across the table with the ease of a man who had occupied 1,000 rooms like this one and considered each of them his. "So," Dominic said, glancing at the pitch deck on the display, "I've put together materials that I think will give you a genuine sense of what we're developing here. The concept, the figures, the direction. I believe once you see the full picture, I don't need the presentation," Marcus said. Dominic paused. The smile held but narrowed slightly at the edges. "The way a frame does when the wood shifts in humidity." "All right," he said slowly. "Where would you like to begin?" Marcus reached into the leather portfolio he had brought and placed a document on the table. He pushed it across the pale ash toward Dominic without hurry. It was the Reed Trust's ownership records for the full industrial corridor. Every parcel, every address, every square foot documented and clean. Dominic looked down at it. He lifted it. He read. Marcus let him read. I understand, Marcus said, that over the past 2 years you have been presenting investors with a development proposal, a flagship project, and that the proposal has described access to this land. He allowed that to settle for a moment. I am that access. I'm here to close it. The smile was gone. Dominic set the document on the table and looked at Marcus. Truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time since they had sat down. Marcus, I think there may be some. The Reed Trust holds a controlling position in a regional infrastructure fund, Marcus continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not shift forward. He remained exactly as he had been sitting. 3 of your current private creditors are investors in that fund. Our position gives us standing to raise questions about how secured lending is being applied. He paused. Those questions have already been raised. The responses create difficulty for your existing projects. Raymond Finch went still on his side of the table. Dominic was very quiet. I am not here to issue threats, Marcus said. I am presenting facts. Facts that exist independent of this conversation and will remain after it concludes. He looked at the ownership records lying on the table between them. The land is not available. It was not available 2 years ago when you began informing people that you had a route to the owner. It is not available today, and it will not be available to you. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation running behind the walls was audible. Marcus placed both hands flat on the table and looked at Dominic Hale directly. You told my wife she was making an upgrade, Marcus said. I wanted to meet the man who believed that. He held the look for one long, measured, unhurried moment, entirely without malice. Now I have. Marcus stood. He picked up his portfolio. He fastened the center button of his jacket. He walked to the door, Simone beside him, and he did not look back. Behind them, the conference room held its silence. Then came the sound of papers being gathered. Quick, quiet, deliberate. It was Raymond Finch. He had already begun collecting his documents from the table before the door had fully closed. The first notice arrived on a Monday. Marcus learned of it through Simone, who learned of it through the kind of quiet professional network that makes no noise but always knows. One of Dominic's private creditors, a firm out of the financial district called Westmore Capital, had formally withdrawn from his flagship downtown project. The stated reason was clean and administrative. Unresolved collateral concerns pending further review. 5 words. The kind of 5 words that in the development world arrive like a structural failure in a load-bearing column. Marcus read Simone's message, set his phone face down on the desk, and returned to the drawing spread out in front of him. He did not mark the occasion. There was nothing to mark. This was simply physics. Things that were never sound eventually give way. The second creditor followed 11 days later. This one sent no written notice. They sent a representative, a young man in a dark suit who arrived at Dominic's office, requested 45 minutes, and departed in 20. The word traveled by that same afternoon. In the development community, that kind of withdrawal does not stay contained. It moves through lunch meetings and private calls and the pauses between sentences at industry gatherings. People who had been observing Dominic's flagship project with measured interest began observing it with something else entirely. Without the Reed Trust's industrial corridor as its foundation, without those parcels, those addresses, those clean square feet that Dominic had been promising investors for 2 years, the approach to the third creditor simply had nothing left beneath it. There was no anchor. There was no access. There was only a slide on a screen, and a man behind it whose figures did not withstand examination. The third creditor declined. They sent nothing at all. Raymond Finch's public statement appeared on a Thursday morning, posted to his firm's website in measured, neutral language. He was pursuing other directions. He wished Dominic's ventures well. He had arrived at the decision some time ago and was grateful for the years of partnership. It was 11 sentences. It said nothing directly. It communicated everything. By the following week, the penthouse had appeared in print. Not the unit itself, but a line in a financial filing that a business reporter had traced. A mortgage, not a purchase, not an asset. A debt dressed in floor-to-ceiling windows and a prominent address. The charity gala sponsorship, The one Carla's colleagues had attended the year before, the one that had been discussed over dinner while Marcus sat quietly and said nothing, was quietly withdrawn. The organization's communications director noted only that sponsorship arrangements were assessed each year. She said it pleasantly. She did not return subsequent inquiries. The city's development community is a contained world. It operates entirely on standing, on whose name moves capital, on whose endorsement makes a room sit forward, on whether the account a man offers of himself is consistent with what his financial records show when examined by someone who understands how to read them. Reputations built on projection rather than substance do not simply erode in that world. They correct sharply. Dominic Hale's correction had arrived. Carla was still inside it when it began. She watched it the way you watch a crack spread from a corner of the ceiling. Slowly at first, then in a way that makes clear it was always going to reach the center. She did not speak much about it, not aloud. There was no one to speak to. The evenings had grown quieter. The invitations had grown fewer. Dominic was preoccupied in the way a man is preoccupied when he is managing difficulties he cannot discuss in front of the person he is trying to hold on to. She was at the kitchen table in Dominic's penthouse. Her kitchen table now, or what had felt like hers when Anthony knocked. She had not called him, he had simply come. He had a paper bag with 2 coffees from the place near his office. He set them on the table without ceremony and sat down across from her, the same way he had sat at kitchen tables with her their entire lives. Steady, present, not performing anything. They talked for a time about small things, their mother's back garden, a series he had been watching, a mutual friend's new child. Ordinary things, the kind that remind you the world is still in motion even when your piece of it has stopped feeling stable. Then Anthony set his cup down and looked at her directly. "You made this decision, Carla," he said quietly. No sharpness to it, just the plain weight of something true. Now you learn from it. She didn't push back. She had pushed back once on the phone weeks earlier and she no longer had it in her. She looked at the table. "I have a name," he said. "A counselor. She's good. She doesn't let people take the easy path, which means she actually makes a difference." He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "Call her." Carla took the paper and held it with both hands. Anthony stayed for the remainder of the hour. He did not attempt to repair it. He did not pretend the damage wasn't visible. He simply sat with her inside the wreckage of her own, making the way a good brother does. Not because it was easy, but because she was still his sister, and she was still going to need to find her way through to the other side of this. When he rose to leave, he embraced her. She held on a moment longer than she had intended. Anthony drove home through streets still lit with the last of the evening. His hands rested loosely on the wheel. The radio was low. His chest carried that particular weight it holds when love and grief press against each other from inside, and there is no clean way to separate them. He thought about the piece of paper Carla had held in both hands. He thought about the way her voice had sounded on the phone 10 days ago when she had first reached out. Not certain anymore, not composed, just worn. He hoped she would call the counselor. He believed she probably would. He turned onto his street. He pulled into the drive and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the quiet tick of cooling metal. He had told her the truth. That was everything he could offer. It was sufficient, and it was the only thing he had that would actually carry any weight. When everything else had stopped looking solid, he got out of the car. He went inside. He set the grief down at the door. Not because it had lifted, but because there was nothing left this evening that required him to carry it upright. 6 months is enough time for the world to proceed as though it was never any different. The site stretched 3 blocks across. It occupied a section of the city that the development community had been labeling underinvested for 2 decades while doing nothing to address it. A polite term for disregarded, for bypassed, for left to manage its own quiet decline without intervention or attention. The buildings that remained on the surrounding blocks were weathered but not broken. The people who occupied them carried the particular dignity of those who had never been handed much and had constructed something regardless. Marcus had driven through this neighborhood for years. He knew the corner shop on Delmare with the hand-lettered sign. He knew the church on 5th with the split gutter that had been splitting for a decade. He had looked at this part of the city, the way his father had shown him to look. Not at what was absent, but at what the foundation could carry. The foundation here could carry a great deal. The Reed Trust's first publicly announced community development had broken ground 9 weeks prior. The permit was posted to the construction barrier in a plastic sleeve, the way all permits are, procedural and unassuming, turning slightly in the wind. Marcus Reed, principal developer. Reed Family Holdings Trust. His name there in plain black print, available to anyone who passed and chose to read it. He had not delivered a speech about it. He had not issued a statement. Simone had handled the planning commission submissions, and someone at the commission had apparently passed it along to someone at the city paper's business desk, because a brief item had run on a Tuesday morning. 12 sentences on the project, 4 on the trust, 2 on Marcus. His phone had received 14 messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. He had replied to 4 of them. He was not new to this kind of work. He was new to doing it under his own name in plain view without the quiet cover of anonymity his father had shown him to carry. It settled differently than he had anticipated. Not worse, just different. Like walking out of a building you've been inside long enough that the open air needs a moment to feel familiar. He was on site by 6:15. Same truck, same thermos. The truck had 145,000 miles on it now, and the passenger side heating ran slightly warm in the mornings, but it started each time and it brought him where he needed to be. He had thought once or twice about replacing it. He hadn't. His crew arrived by 6:45. They moved the way a capable crew moves, without requiring oversight at every point, without needing the principal standing over them. Marcus walked the frame, checked 4 load points along the western wall, asked 3 questions, received 3 sound answers, and moved on. The structure was rising. You could see the shape of it now, the outline of what it would become. Commercial on the ground level, residential above, open space woven through the interior, a project that would return something to a part of the city that had already given enough away. Ruth arrived at 10:30. She came in her own car, parked with care on the street beyond the fence, and walked through the site entrance with the unhurried steadiness of a woman who has been patient her entire life and sees no cause to rush now. She wore a dark coat and carried nothing. She didn't need anything. She walked to where Marcus was standing and stood beside him. They looked at the framework together, the steel and timber and concrete block rising against a pale November sky, the crew moving through it with noise and purpose and the particular competence of people who understand what they are building and why. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would have said nothing about this." Marcus looked at the frame, at the northern wall that was going to be solid, at the foundation already poured and settled and permanent. "So will I," he said. Ruth nodded once. That was sufficient. She had nothing more to add, and she did not reach for more. His phone moved at 2:30. He was at the site table, a folding table near the foreman's trailer, covered in drawings and ring stains from a dozen coffee cups and a clipboard with inspection notes stacked at the edge. He lifted the phone. He didn't place the number immediately. Then he did. A single message. 5 words. "I hope you are well." He read it once. He set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his thermos and took a slow drink of coffee that had gone slightly cool in the November air. Then he capped it, tucked it under his arm, and walked back out onto the site. He walked the full length of it without rushing, from the southern boundary to the northern boundary and back again, past the crew, past the rising frame, past the permit in its plastic sleeve on the barrier, unhurried, precise. His boots on the packed earth, his eyes on the work, his name on every document that mattered, exactly where he belonged. Around him, his crew moved and called and built, raising something that would still be standing long after every version of this story had been told and set aside and told again. Marcus walked the line. He kept his attention on the work. He did not look back. He drove an old truck. He wore worn work clothes. He clocked onto job sites before the sun came up. And his wife spent 9 months planning her exit because she had already decided that made him small. She had no idea she was leaving the wealthiest private black landowner in the city. Marcus Reed was 44 years old, and until the evening he came home to a half-emptied bedroom, he had convinced himself his marriage was simply going through a rough patch. He was the kind of man who showed up early and said little, the kind of man who fixed problems quietly and never once felt the need to announce what he owned. While he was solving structural failures on job sites and managing a generational family trust worth 8 figures, his wife Carla was already speaking to an attorney. She called him ordinary. She called him small. She called him an upgrade away from the life she deserved. She was wrong about all of it. And she would spend a long time figuring that out. Marcus Reed was 44 years old, and until the evening he returned to a half-cleared closet, he had convinced himself his marriage was simply weathering a difficult stretch. He drove an aging pickup truck. He wore worn work gear on the job. He carried a steel thermos and was on construction sites well before dawn, and his wife Carla had quietly concluded that made him beneath her. For 9 months, while Marcus solved foundation failures that stumped senior engineers and quietly oversaw a generational family trust worth 8 figures, Carla was building her way out. The evening she finally settled across from him at their dining table, poised and resolved, she told him she was worth more, that she had located it, that the man she was choosing over him was, in her own words, a step up. She had no idea she was walking away from the wealthiest private black property owner in the region. No idea that the man she had written off as unremarkable had never once felt the need to display what he held. Marcus didn't push back, didn't plead. He walked to his late father's office, pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in 4 years, and looked at a figure that would have stopped the whole conversation cold. Then he closed the file and reached for his phone. The alarm sounded at 4:52 a.m. Marcus Reed didn't flinch, didn't reach for it. He simply opened his eyes, lay still for exactly 4 seconds, and rose. That was the way he approached everything. The kitchen sat dark and still. He filled his thermos with black coffee, no sugar, and tightened the lid. He pulled on his work jacket, checked his breast pocket for his field notebook, and stepped out to the drive. The truck waited under the pale yellow cast of the street lamp. A 2016 Chevy Silverado, dark blue with a deep gouge along the rear panel from a steel beam incident 2 years back that he'd never gotten around to fixing. He moved through the city while it was still asleep. The Hargrove Street project was a 7-story mixed-use structure rising on the northern edge of downtown. Marcus had been the lead site engineer for 5 months. By the time he rolled through the chain-link entrance, the sky still held the deep tone of pre-dawn. 3 crew members were already present, leaning against a truck bed with their own cups. They stood straighter when his headlights swept over them. "Morning, Mr. Reed. Morning." He gave them each a nod. "Give me 15 minutes, then we walk the west columns." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Inside the site trailer, Marcus unrolled the structural drawings across the work table and examined them beneath the humming overhead light. He ran his finger carefully along the load-bearing support placements on the second-floor layout. Something had been nagging him about Section D4 for 3 days. A low, persistent unease he couldn't settle. He identified it at 7:22 a.m. for junior engineers arrived at 7:45. They were capable people, focused, motivated, recently licensed. When Marcus showed them what he'd uncovered, the room went silent. The anchor bolt intervals on 3 of the western supports had been drawn at a spacing that failed to account for the torsional stress introduced by the building's offset stairwell core. It wasn't obvious. Nothing visible from the street would have suggested it. But under sustained load conditions over sufficient time, it would have become a very serious liability, possibly far worse than that. "How did you see that?" one of them asked. Marcus capped his marker, "Because I kept looking." He forwarded the correction to the project architect before 8 a.m. No fanfare, no commentary. He poured more coffee and walked back onto the site. That was how he handled everything. He was home before 7 that evening. Carla was in the kitchen when he came through the back door. She was still dressed for work, a navy jacket, pearl earrings, standing at the island scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, Soup on the stove, she said. Thanks. He set his thermos by the sink. Dinner was what dinner had been lately, quiet in the way that said something was missing. Carla talked through her afternoon, a budget review, a difficult supervisor, a colleague who had just accepted a role at a larger health network. Marcus listened. He offered a question when a question fit. Then she brought up the reception. Apparently Dominic Hale hosted some fundraiser last weekend, she said, dragging her fork across the plate. Rooftop venue in the financial district. Half the executive team was there. She paused. Lisa wouldn't stop going on about it all day. The wine, the skyline. Another pause, quieter. Sounds like it was memorable. Marcus looked at his plate. Sounds that way. You could have been organizing events like that, Carla said. Not with irritation. With something lower and harder than irritation. If you'd gone for senior director when Hargrove retired, you had everything it took. I like the work I do, he said. She studied him for a beat. Then she turned back to her screen. He cleaned the kitchen after dinner. He dried the dishes and returned them to their proper shelves. He thought, not for the first time, about something his father had said to him when he was 21. Standing in the study of the family property, watching the old man review financial records without a trace of urgency. Marcus, a man who makes noise about his wealth, gives people a reason to want what he owns more than they want who he is. The right woman won't need to know the numbers. She'll see you first. He had believed that at 21. He still did, mostly. He put down the dish towel and headed upstairs. He noticed it in the bedroom. The top drawer of Carla's nightstand hung open, empty. He turned toward the dresser. Her jewelry case was gone. The small dark wooden one her grandmother had passed down, the one that held everything she considered irreplaceable. He opened the wardrobe. Her travel bag was absent. He crossed to the filing cabinet in the far corner and slid open the second drawer. Her passport, her birth certificate, her social security card. Gone. Marcus stood in the still bedroom for a long moment. His expression didn't shift. Then he walked back downstairs. Carla was at the kitchen table, hands clasped, waiting. Carla spoke first. I've spent a long time figuring out how to say this, she said. I need to get it right. Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He placed both hands flat on the table. She appeared controlled. That was exactly the word for it, like she had rehearsed it in the car, in the bathroom mirror, maybe in Dominic Hale's penthouse while Marcus was walking job sites before sunrise. Her pearl earrings caught the kitchen light. Her jacket was still on. I have been miserable for years, Walter. She delivered it the way a physician states a prognosis. Measured, certain. Already beyond the stage where it stings, not because of anything catastrophic, not because you did anything unforgivable, just this. She gestured around the room, at the table, at him perhaps, at all of it. This is not the life I was meant to have. Marcus said nothing. I tried, she continued. I want you to understand that I genuinely tried, but I kept waiting for something to open up and it never did. And I believe, she paused to find the word. I believe I am entitled to a life with depth. The refrigerator ran steadily in the quiet. I've been with someone else, she said, for close to 9 months. His name is Dominic Hale. The name landed between them like something heavy released from a height. Marcus looked at her. His face did not move. His hands did not shift. He gives me the life I should always have had. She said it without hesitation, without malice, but without remorse either. The way someone states something they have absorbed so fully it no longer feels cruel to speak aloud. He's an upgrade, Marcus. I know what that sounds like, but it's the truth. And I think you're owed the truth. An upgrade. She said it the way people say, what can you do? Like the calculation was simple, like the answer had always been obvious. And she had already run the numbers. And they came out clean. I've already retained an attorney, she said. I'm moving forward with a divorce. I'm not here to negotiate. I just wanted to say it to your face. I felt you deserved at least that. She folded her hands again and waited. Marcus sat with it for a moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside, a car drifted slowly up the block, its headlights crossing the window and moving on. Then he put his question to her. Did you tell him about the holdings? Carla blinked. It was the only moment her composure faltered, just barely. A subtle movement behind her eyes, not guilt, not alarm, confusion. What holdings? She said. Marcus held her gaze for one long, unbroken moment. Then he rose from the table. He didn't explain. He didn't raise his voice. He lifted his thermos from the counter, set it down with a soft click, and walked out of the kitchen. His father's study sat at the far end of the hallway, a narrow room with dark wood walls, floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a broad walnut desk that had belonged to the Reed family longer than Marcus had drawn breath. Carla had looked in once, several years back, and described it as dated. She never returned. She had no feeling for old wood and old books, and so she had no feeling for the room, and so she had never grasped what the room truly contained. Marcus switched on the desk lamp. Soft light settled into the small space. He lowered himself into his father's chair, deep leather the shade of aged bourbon, and opened the bottom drawer. It glided smoothly. He had kept the slides lubricated even in the years he didn't open it. Certain habits his father had instilled were like that. Upkeep as a form of respect. Attention given to things regardless of whether anyone was watching. Inside the drawer was a single unmarked envelope. No writing on the front. Just a thin strip of tape across the seal where his father had marked a year in careful ink. The year of the last independent valuation. Marcus set the envelope on the desk. He opened it with both hands. The papers inside were arranged the way his father had arranged all things. Orderly, deliberate, in a sequence that told the complete story to anyone willing to follow it. Asset registers, portfolio summaries, equity ledgers, fund statements, and at the back behind everything else, the most recent certified appraisal of the Reed Family Holdings Trust. Marcus turned to the final page. The figure at the bottom was 8 digits. He looked at it for a long time, not with pride, not with sorrow, but with the calm, unhurried attention of a man confirming something he had always known but needed to sit beside once more. He slid the papers back in. He returned the envelope to the drawer. He picked up his phone and dialed the one number he carried in memory. It rang twice. Marcus. His mother's voice was even. She answered the phone the same way she answered everything, as though she had been waiting for it. "Hey, Mama," he said. "You have time." Alina Reed lived 18 minutes from Marcus's house in a part of the city that had stayed mostly the same for 30 years. The blocks were shaded by mature elms whose roots had long since begun reclaiming the pavement. The homes were tended, unpretentious, solid. The kind of street where residents cut their own grass and recognized one another by name. Marcus pulled into the driveway at 9:53 p.m. The porch light was burning. He climbed the front steps, and before his hand reached the door, it opened. Alina stood in the frame in her housecoat and slippers, her white hair pinned neatly, her face carrying the same expression it had worn every time he had brought her something difficult. Not alarmed, not gentle, simply present. Grounded the way old trees are grounded, not because nothing has ever bent them, but because everything has, and they remain. "Come on in," she said. "Coffee's ready." They sat at her kitchen table the same way they always had. Marcus with both hands circling his cup, Alina with hers pushed to the side, cooling untouched while she took it all in. He walked her through everything from the start. Carla at the table, composed and prepared. The word she had chosen, upgrade, and the flat certainty with which she had said it. The 9 months, Dominic Hale, the lawyer, the filing already in motion, and then the question Marcus had asked and the look that had crossed Carla's face when she heard it. Alina listened without interrupting. When he stopped, the kitchen was still. The old clock above the range marked time. Alina lifted her mug, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. She never once asked, Alina said. Not in 12 years. No, Marcus said. Alina gave a single nod, as if that one fact had confirmed something she had been carrying quietly for a long time. She never asked because she had made up her mind about who you were before she ever really knew you. She said it without anger, without any trace of satisfaction, only the plain, settled weight of a true thing spoken plainly. She saw the truck. She saw the work clothes. She noted the way you carried yourself at social gatherings or didn't, and she assembled an image. And then she spent 12 years living inside that image without once checking whether it matched anything real. Marcus turned his mug slowly between his palms. Your father used to say the right woman wouldn't need to know, Alina continued. And he was right about nearly everything, but what he meant was the right woman would care enough to find out. She paused. Carla was never interested enough in who you actually were, Marcus. That's the thing that should have told you something years ago. Marcus didn't dispute that. He sat with it. Alina set her hands flat on the table and met her son's eyes directly. Let me tell you what she left behind, since she never thought to ask. What followed was not a lecture. Alina was not a woman given to lectures. It was more like a careful inventory, the kind offered by someone who had been present for the building of the thing and knew each component from the inside out. The Reed Family Holdings Trust, she explained, presently held 14 commercial properties throughout the metropolitan area. 5 of them sat within the Callaway Corridor, the row of office towers and medical facilities on the city's east edge, where 2 of the region's largest hospital networks leased their administrative floors. One of those tenants, Alina said, meeting Marcus's eyes without hesitation, was the hospital system where Carla worked. The administrative wing where Carla reported each morning, where she had advanced through the organization, where she had constructed the career she prided herself on. Those offices occupied a building that the Reed family owned. She had been showing up to Marcus's building for 7 years without ever knowing it. Beyond that, the trust controlled 3 light industrial properties on the city's western boundary, a majority stake in a regional infrastructure fund spanning 5 counties, and a collection of smaller equity holdings that had been appreciating without fanfare for close to 25 years. The most recent appraisal, Alina said, placed the combined value of the trust's assets at just under $45 million. Marcus was the single wealthiest private black landowner in the city. He had been for years. She lived in your home for 12 years, Alina said, and never once thought to ask what your father left behind. Not the day he passed, not at the burial, not one time. She lifted her mug again. That is not an oversight. That is a woman who had already concluded the answer was irrelevant. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The clock above the range continued. I'm going to let her finish celebrating, he said at last, before I do anything. Alina looked at him. Something stirred behind her expression, not surprise, recognition. Then go carefully, she said, and go all the way. Marcus nodded. He finished his coffee. He helped Alina wash the cups. He kissed her cheek at the door, walked back down the steps, and climbed into the truck. He drove home through the still, dark city, his city, and he left the radio off. Marcus was awake before the alarm. He hadn't slept much, though not because he was falling apart. The grief was present somewhere beneath it all, but it was quiet, and he knew how to leave quiet things undisturbed. He lay in the dark for a time, looking at the ceiling, thinking the way his father had shown him to think. Not about emotions, about order, about what had to happen first and what followed from that, and what foundation had to be solid before anything else could be built on it. By 5:15 he was dressed. By 5:30 he had his thermos and his phone. He sat at the kitchen table, the same surface where Carla had been seated 14 hours earlier, and he called Simone Croft. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, she said, no greeting, just readiness. I need you at the estate this morning, he said, as early as you can manage. I'll be there by 8, she said. She arrived at 7:45. The Reed family estate occupied a quiet block in the older section of the city's north end. A distinguished 2-story brick home set behind a line of established trees that blocked the view from the road without appearing to try. The grounds were orderly. The facade was plain. No security gate, no water feature, no statement entrance. Carla had called it a family place the first time she walked through. Homey, she'd said, traditional. She had never once questioned what the property taxes reflected, or who coordinated the maintenance, or whose signature was on the title. She had moved through its rooms with the polite indifference of someone touring a gallery exhibition that didn't quite match her taste, and then turned the conversation back to kitchen renovations and a colleague's new build. Simone Croft had been visiting this house for more than 12 years. She arrived in a slate-colored sedan, carrying a leather case that appeared modest but moved with the weight of dense paperwork. She was a measured woman, composed and unhurried, with attentive eyes set behind slim rectangular frames. She wore no accessories beyond small gold studs. She presented exactly as she was, someone who had devoted 2 decades to mastering something that mattered and had long since stopped needing to demonstrate it. Marcus opened the door before she reached it. They settled in the study, his father's study, the same room where Marcus had opened the drawer 2 evenings prior. The walnut desk, the shelves, the narrow window admitting one clean shaft of morning light. Simone placed 4 folders on the desk, opened the first, and started. She laid it out with the precision of someone who had been working through the numbers since the call came in. The Reed Family Holdings Trust, she confirmed, had been created by Marcus's father 31 years ago, a full 17 years before Marcus and Carla married. It was structured as a closed, irrevocable trust, a legal framework designed specifically, in Simone's phrasing, to sit entirely beyond the scope of marital property claims. Marcus's name appeared in the trust as sole beneficiary and managing trustee, but the trust itself was a separate legal entity. Carla's divorce petition, Simone said, identified 2 assets: Marcus's compensation from his engineering firm and the equity in the home they had shared. That was the extent of it. Her attorney looked no further, Simone said, because she gave him no reason to, Marcus said. Simone nodded once. He would have needed to know there was something worth finding. She closed the first folder. She didn't tell him, so he didn't look. The trust is entirely intact. Marcus absorbed that. He set his hands flat on the desk. 2 things, he said. First, lock down every voluntary disclosure. Nothing beyond what the filing legally compels. If her attorney hasn't asked for it, we don't volunteer it. Understood, Simone said. She was already writing. Second, he paused. I want a discreet review of Dominic Hale's development holdings. Complete picture. Projects, financing, backers, outstanding debt. Discreet. I don't want him sensing that anyone is looking. Simone lifted her eyes from the notepad. Something moved in her expression. Not quite surprise, more like the recognition of someone watching a chess match who has just seen a move they hadn't anticipated. I can have initial findings to you before close of business, she said. Then let's not wait, Marcus said. The report arrived at 6:41 that evening via a secure transmission from Simone's office. Marcus read it at his father's desk. Same chair, same settled quiet of evening. Dominic Hale's signature downtown project, the glass tower he had been presenting to capital partners and leading within every feature article published over the past 3 years, was leveraged at nearly double its independently assessed value. He had drawn financing against projected revenues that had never arrived. 4 private creditors were currently holding notes on the development. Marcus read that sentence a second time. Then he continued. 3 of those 4 creditors, names he placed without any effort, were partners in the Regional Infrastructure Fund, the same fund in which the Reed Family Holdings Trust held a controlling stake. Marcus set the document on the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Not yet, he said quietly. The room held still. The evening light stayed. He reached for his thermos. The penthouse occupied the 16th floor. Carla stood before the full-length window with a glass of white wine and gazed at the city spread out below her. The glow, the motion, the clean geometry of avenues extending in every direction. It was the sort of view that conferred a sense of significance simply by proximity, as if the city had arranged itself for your consideration, as if it had been patient. She had unpacked her good jewelry that afternoon. She had arranged it across the vanity counter in the master bath, the stone one with the radiant floor, and she had looked at it and felt for the first time in what seemed like years that everything had found its correct position. She called Anthony at 7:30. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said. His voice was the same as it always was, quiet, deliberate, slightly guarded. I just needed to reach out, Carla said. She stepped away from the window and settled onto the arm of the long ivory sofa. Let you know I'm doing well, more than well, honestly. Good, Anthony said. Anthony, you cannot imagine this view, she said, and the laugh that followed was effortless. Open, the skyline alone. I mean, it's genuinely something. We had dinner at Ember last night. The original location, not the one on 4th. Ah, Anthony said. She waited. Nothing more came. You're not going to say anything. I'm here, he said. You sound like you're sitting at a wake. I'm not, he said. I'm relieved you're all right. I'm better than all right. She settled back into the cushion. I feel like myself again. Like the version of me that got a little, I don't know, compressed over the last few years. Anthony was quiet briefly. Then, have you spoken to Marcus? Carla exhaled once. The lawyers are managing everything, but you did speak to him afterward. He was fine, Anthony. That's my whole point. Exactly what I knew to expect. She shook her head even with no one watching. No scene, no reaction. He just stood there, same as he always did. The man has no energy, no drive. He never had. Anthony said he caught that structural error on the Hargrove job before the inspector flagged it. You mentioned that to me once. That's trade work, Carla said. That's not ambition. That's just doing your job. Those aren't the same thing. I know they aren't, Anthony said. Something in his delivery made her sit forward slightly. What are you saying? He didn't respond immediately. She could hear the measured pause he took before speaking. It had always unsettled her, that pause. Anthony never let words out by accident. Carla, he said, did you know his family controls the Callaway corridor? She paused. The what? The Callaway commercial corridor. The row of properties running from Westmore down through the old industrial district. She shook her head slowly. Anthony, what are you talking about? The Reed family, he said. Marcus's family. They've owned those properties for a long time. Commercial tenants, warehouse space, the whole stretch. He stopped briefly. The administrative offices for your hospital network are located in a building on that corridor, Carla. She felt something shift inside her ribcage. Very small, very still. That's, she began. Anthony, where is this even coming from? I looked into it, he said, after you called me last week. Something didn't sit right and I needed to understand it. Another pause. I'm not making this dramatic. I'm reporting what I found. Marcus is an engineer, she said. She kept her voice level. She forced it level. He works for a firm. He drives an old truck. I'm aware of what he drives, Anthony said. Then you can understand why what you're describing sounds, Carla. His voice was quiet, not cold, not pointed, just quiet in the way that made her stop. I'm not asking you to do anything with this. I'm asking whether you knew. The silence between them stretched. Outside, the city burned with light against the dark. 16 floors below, a horn called out and dissolved. You're overreacting, she said. Anthony didn't push back. That was the nature of Anthony. When he was right, he didn't argue. He let the quiet finish what he'd started. I need to go, Carla said. All right, he said. Call if you want to talk. She ended the call. She sat on the sofa without moving for a while. Then she stood, rinsed her glass, and went to bed. The linens were expensive. The room was cool and hushed. The city pulsed 16 floors below in that remote, untouchable way. It should have felt like a reward. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. Did you tell him about the holdings? Marcus's voice, flat, unhurried, carrying nothing beneath it. She could trace the shape of the question he had asked and then walked away from. The question she had not returned to until right now.